Story 1. The silent campsite. The tents were empty. The zippers weren't. I've walked Loop C more nights than I can count. That night the quiet felt staged. The fire ring still bled heat into the sand. Marshmallows sat on skewers like pale bulbs, blistered and waiting. No packs. No shoes. No trash crinkle from a messy family. Just the smell, thin and sour, of burned plastic threading through the smoke. I held my light low, sweeping labels, footprints, ringed ash. The hairs on my forearms prickled under my jacket. Campsites tell stories. This one had skipped the end. A zipper rasped to my left. Not fast. Not a tug. A careful test like someone easing a tooth. I turned. Every tent stood open and empty, doors slack in the breeze. Then another zipper, behind me this time, from a tent I could see wasn't moving. The sound didn't fit the air. It was too close, too controlled. I told myself they'd left in a hurry. Bear, fight, medical run, easy answers. My beam found boot prints overlaying each other in the dust. They circled the ring, looped out toward the trees, then arced back to the same spot. Not a trail away. A trail that refused to leave. I keyed my radio and called it in. Dispatch crackled back, but the static had a dry rasp I couldn't place. Too clean, like someone running a zipper just out of sight. I swept the fire ring. A toothbrush gone soft at one end, a warped cooler lid, a spatula with its handle blistered. The plastic tang made the back of my tongue prickle. No paw prints, no kid-sized sneakers. Just adult boots, the same pair tracing the same uncertain loop. The left heel had a small scallop in the dust that made my stomach drop. My own left heel wears the same. I worked the tents one by one, tying a strip of flagging tape to each zipper pull. The air was still, the pines barely nodded. Yet the tape lifted and settled as if someone were breathing through the canvas. I tugged one zipper to check the teeth. Its sound answered from 2 sites over, sharp and neat, as if the nylon there were practicing a reply. "Park Ranger," I called. Call out. The only answer was the whisper of fabric and the soft tick-tick of cooling stones in the fire ring, while the boot prints at my feet seemed to darken. Fresh dust sifted into the same oval path, as if the walking hadn't stopped at all. I walked the loop once, counting sites out of habit. C12, C13, C14. Every numbered post had a smear of soot at the same height, a thumbprint of black. At C15 a park map lay folded under a rock, edges singed, loop C circled twice in yellow highlighter. I lifted it and felt heat still living in the paper. Beneath the rock, the dirt showed the scalloped heel again. My heel, stamped deeper as if whoever was walking had started to lean. The smell of melted nylon thickened near the picnic table. A thin strand of plastic, drawn out like taffy, ran from the tabletop into the grass and disappeared. I set a test. I zipped one tent close to the midpoint and set my radio beside it, volume high. Then I walked 30 yards to the bare box and turned my back. The tent zipper behind me purred the rest of the way down. My radio crackled. Not voice, just the zipper's exact cadence, like it had been recorded a second before and played back at the same distance from my ear. I spun and flashed the beam. The tape I'd tied to the pole was still. The teeth lay perfectly meshed, no hand on them. The boot prints at my feet were new, toes angled toward the closed door. The left heel scalloped. What? I cleared a patch of dust with my boot and drew a straight line toward the road with a tent stake. Heel to toe, I counted out 20 steps along it. No detours. No drifting. When I looked back, my light showed the impossible. Fresh prints had butted off my track at step 9, curved toward the fire ring, and closed the same oval I'd been studying since I arrived. The left heel scalloped. The weight more on the outside edge, my old knee compensation. Heat bled through my radio into my hip. The plastic smell sharpened like a warning. I keyed up, "Dispatch, loop C is." From the pines came my own voice, a half-beat late, trimmed of breath, like a clean cut. As it finished, a zipper answered from 3 tents at once, matching my syllables like punctuation. I told myself, enough. I'd walk to the paved spur, call for a vehicle, and we'd clear this in daylight. I passed C16's post and found C12 again, same soot thumbprint at shoulder height. I touched my belt without thinking and came away with a black smear on my thumb that matched the arc on the post. The strand of plastic I'd seen earlier clung to my glove when I brushed it. It stretched and hummed like a thin string, and somewhere a zipper ran slow in sympathy. My headlamp swept the ground. Another set of boot prints had appeared beside mine, offset by half a step, toes slightly inward, pacing me. Same scalloped heel. But on the other foot, as if whoever was making them faced me while we walked, closing the loop from the other side. I stop and try to set the rules myself. I pull the radio battery, kill my headlamp for a count of 5, then bring the beam back up. I take out my knife and nick the plastic strand where it hums from the table to the grass. It parts with a soft pop and curls from the heat, and for a blessed second the air is simple pine and ash. Then the trees answer with a zipper drawn very slowly, all teeth, no hands, as if the forest were smiling shut. Dust lifts in tiny puffs around my toes and settles into ovals I haven't walked yet. The loop writes itself whether I move or not. I unlace my left boot to break the signature. If there's no scallop, there's no me, I think. Before my sock touches dirt, a bare print appears beside the track. My big toe's old crescent scar etched in the powder, pointed toward me. The tents breathe. All the flagging strips rise at once and hold, like chests full before a dive. One zipper closes halfway and waits. Another answers from the opposite side of the loop, finishing the sound for it. I slide my boot back on with shaking fingers and realize what's wrong here. I'm not leaving marks. I'm being read. I test the world the way you probe a toothache. I score a shallow line in a pine with my knife. Resin beads, sharp and green. Then the cut closes with a neat little whisper, teeth drawing together where no teeth exist, and a burnt plastic side twists out of the bark like breath through a straw. I drag the blade across the wooden post at C12. A zipper runs under my hand and the gouge seals, leaving the same soot thumbprint at my shoulder height, like it borrowed my smudge to fix itself. Ay, I say into the radio, trying to feed it noise instead of words. The pines give me back my voice, trimmed and tidy, the stutter combed flat, as if the loop refuses nonsense. I think of the tents breathing in unison, of fabric meeting fabric until there's no gap for a body to pass. So I go the other way, no new marks. I place my boots inside the prints already there, match angle, match the outside edge lean, and keep my weight light. The dust holds. The zippers hesitate, teeth humming but not biting. 8 steps like that and the air goes truly quiet, the first honest quiet since I stepped in. I risk a 9th and lift my head, and I'm beside C12 again, my smudge fresh on the number, heat waking in the folded map. Only one thing has changed. A clear filament now runs from the nearest tent door to the zipper at my jacket collar, drawn tight enough to sing. The tent's pull tab waits at half-mast like a mouth holding a breath. When I inhale, the thread trembles. When I exhale, my collar moves a hair on its own. Then from somewhere very close, right at my throat, I hear a zipper begin. I pinch the tab at my throat and drag it down hard. The filament sings and snaps against my knuckles, recoils to the tent door and lies there trembling. Open, I say, not to dispatch, not to the trees, just to whatever keeps reaching for the teeth, and I start moving backward, planting my boots inside the prints I've already made. As I pass each tent I haul its zipper to the bottom stop and leave the mouth wide, pinning pulls under rocks, jamming one with my knife so the teeth can't meet. The fabric quivers but stays. The plastic tang thins. For the first time all night the air feels like air. I back onto the paved spur and slide the battery into the radio. Dispatch, this is Loop C, I say. The reply comes clean and unsensed. No echo from the trees, no tidy mimic, and I realize I'm shaking. I look once over my shoulder. Inside the circle, doors I left open lift half an inch and settle, like sleepers turning. In the dust around the fire ring, new boot prints appear where no foot falls, keeping the oval going, pressing deeper each lap. left heel scalloped. What? I keep walking until asphalt takes all my weight. The circle keeps turning. We're done here, it isn't. Story 2. The Watcher on the Ridge. The trail climbed in a long, patient curve, each switchback a quiet bargain with the dark. Oak leaves made a dry whisper under my boots, and the wind braided itself through mountain laurel and splashed cold across my face. Somewhere east, the Shenandoah Valley slept in scattered farm lights. Up here, it was just me, the ridge, and a radio that couldn't decide if it was alone. I was 2 hours into a night hike, following blazes that the moon silvered when the canopy thinned. The park had put out an advisory about a missing day hiker, late 30s, blue jacket, likely turned an easy loop into a maze, the dispatcher said. I wasn't part of an official team. I was a volunteer who'd learned the terrain and the ways radios carry or don't carry on a mountain spine. I told myself I was only going to listen, to be another set of boots in case the ridge decided to give someone back. I stopped where the trail sidled up to open rock. The ridge line drew itself against the sky, a sawtooth the color of old iron. My breath made a small engine in the cold. When I thumbed my light on and sent it skimming across the trees, the beam eased through trunks, caught dust, flashed mica. Then it snagged on a shape. Tall, human straight, rigid in the way that felt like listening. I didn't mean to blink. When I did, the figure went out like a candle, and the light fell on nothing but branches, swaying like a tide in the wind. My mouth was dry in an instant. Nothing there, I told myself. Every hiker in the mountains meets a tree that wants to be a person. The radio crackled on my shoulder, a soft cough that opened into breath. Static spilled and gathered. For a sliver of a second, the noise came together around the bones of my name, and then the sound broke apart like a flock. I thumbed the transmit. K4EM copy? My call sign sounded too loud. K4EM on the ridge near mile marker, near the talus past the overlook. My voice walked itself back to me off the stone. Nothing else came. I pushed on. The trail pitched steeper, scuffed with the fossil of old fire road. I set the beam low to give my eyes a horizon. Every few steps the wind stilled and the forest switched sources. The scrape of bark, the quick sleep talk of a squirrel, an owl grating 2 notes and letting them hang. The whole night arranged and rearranged itself around my feet. The next time I lifted the light to the ridge, I did it like checking a stove you're sure you turned off. There, the same place the shape had been. Nothing but a tangle of rhododendron, leaves flipping their pale undersides in the wind. Still, the air around that spot had a weight to it, like the hush of a church when someone stands. K4EM, the radio said, except it didn't. The squelch squealed and spat. I heard the cadence but not the words. Then the signal slid into a smear again. I told myself it was a thermal inversion throwing my signal into a cul-de-sac. I told myself a lot of practical things and believed maybe half a one. The rest of me believed mountains keep old habits, and one of those habits is being looked after by something that never learned to move. The trail spilled me onto the spine proper, the trees pulling back, granite shouldering through soil. The sky was wider up here, a slow river of stars. Off south, a red light pulsed from a distant tower, counting time. I clicked my light off and let my pupils drink. The ridge hummed faintly under the wind, a wire strung between 2 worlds. Copy. I tried again. Any station monitoring park frequencies, come back. A whisper rose out of the handset, a rustle like a coat sleeve grazing a microphone. It filled the empty places between the hiss with the sound of someone standing close enough to fog the glass. Then, at the edge of hearing, my name again, not so much spoken as remembered. I turned the volume down, then up, then down, as if I could find a notch where the night and I agreed on what was there. You're tired, I told myself. You hiked after a long day, you ate a granola bar for dinner, you let the dark take more than it owed. But the feeling didn't live in exhaustion. It lived in the simple geometry of the ridge. Me here, something there, the distance between us wound tight as a string. I walked the spine until the trail reached the ruin of an old foundation, a square of stacked stone the height of my boot. Long before the park, the CCC boys built fire outposts on this line, little houses to sit and bear witness. The hearthless box collected moonlight. A fig of frost glinted on a corner. I stepped over and sat, the stone bleeding cold into me, and I listened to the forest making its night noises like someone rattling parts in a drawer. The radio lay silent. The beam of my light nosed the far edge of the clearing and found prints. A deer, fresh enough that the sharpness was still in the cleaves, trotting AV through the duff. A raccoon had investigated. There was something else, too. Two shallow parallel lines dragged through leaves to the rock, as if someone had set down and lifted up a long, narrow weight. I swung the light back to the ridge line. No figure. And yet, my spine knew where to put the fear, the way you know where a tooth will ache before it does. The exact patch of dark I shouldn't measure with a beam. The place that was waiting. Look, the night said without saying. Go on. Make me real. I didn't, not yet. I sat on the stone and drank from my bottle and watched my breath fog. I thought of the missing hiker, somewhere in this same skin of cold, maybe huddled under a rock lip, counting the minutes by the pulse of their own blood. I thought of the first watchers, men in towers with field glasses and logbooks, learning the wilderness by smoke. I thought of all the ways a mountain keeps a head count. Base, this is K4EM. I kept my voice even. I'm at the stone foundation above the overlook. Finding sign, nothing human. Continuing north. Silence. Then, like a coin dropped in a well, my name again. This time, the radio carried just enough shape to make the hairs rise on my wrists. The syllables were wrong in a way I recognized, as if someone had practiced them without lips. I stood. I didn't sweep the beam. I held it low. I walked until the clearing pinched back into trees, and the trail threaded into a tunnel of laurel. Laurel is the kind of green that looks black at night, and it holds the dark like a bowl. Branches brushed my sleeves with the dry friendliness of a cat. The path here was a seam, and I followed it, telling myself I knew every snag and stump by now, telling myself I would not turn to the right where the ridge was naked. Something kept pace with my peripheral vision. Not the blundering of a bear. Not the flocking antics of deer. It had the talent of a shadow. Always beside, never in front, never behind, asking for me to make it specific. I walked another 20 yards and then stopped, because fear has its own temper and I was spoiling it by pretending. I did the thing it wanted. I turned and lifted my light and let it climb. The beam reached the line of the ridge. For one breath my eyes made a man from bark and wind, tall, shoulders squared, head lifted as if to smell the weather. It felt, and I mean felt, like a meeting at an agreed hour. And then the man dissolved into what he had always been. Two trunks grown close, a limb crooked like an elbow, laurel leaves vibrating with the tension of wind. The ghost of a posture. I laughed, the laugh with too many teeth in it. You win, I told the ridge, which didn't care who I was and didn't need to win or lose. The radio hissed softly, pleased or bored, and then went quiet as sleep. I was going to go on. The practical part of my brain had already laid tracks. Keep north, drop into the saddle, sweep the next hollow. But my feet learned something while I'd been making up my mind. I realized they had turned, their own small decision, and were pointing back the way I'd come. When I started down, the headlamp made a tunnel in which my boots were the only true thing. The music of the leaves resumed exactly where it left off. The night, having gotten what it wanted, stepped aside to let me pass. 2 switchbacks down, my radio chirped. The frequency was park again, crisp as a coin struck on glass. A real voice this time. All units be advised, subject contacted by phone. Self-extricated to Skyline Drive, milepost 12. Stand down. Relief hit me from odd angles, the way joy and nausea can share a room. Copy that, I said. K4EM standing down. I could have been glad and only glad, but a part of me glanced upslope, to where the ridge shouldered the sky. I did it without the light, without the pretense. I felt the spot before I saw it. I looked and saw only the dark pressed to the shape of the earth. I waited to be watched. Nothing moved. The wind backed off for a heartbeat, the trees held their breath, and in that hush I knew, not with the knowledge that fits into words, but with the kind that lives in the spine, that something old had done its job. It had kept count. It had asked to be seen, had fixed me for a moment in its ledger. It had made sure I was paying attention on its border. At the car, the cold packed into me like a second body. The radio rode home in the passenger seat, its little orange screen the only light. I didn't turn it off. At the stoplight in town, with the warm breath of diners fogging restaurant windows, the speaker rustled one last time. The sound of my name was thin as a thread now, almost gone, stretched to breaking. It reached and let go. Days later, the ridge lived under the skin like a splinter of granite. I would be washing a mug or standing in a grocery aisle staring at a shelf of bread, and the shape of that night would stand up inside me. I would feel the exact moment, the exact angle of the beam, the small permission I gave to meet something I couldn't keep. There's a habit that comes from it. When a room is dark, I pause and let my eyes adjust before I switch on the light. On stair landings, I listen for a step that isn't mine. I don't think it's superstition. I think it's manners. The world spends most of its time watching us first. The least we can do is look back once and remember that something on a ridge waited a long time for us to learn how. Story 3. Echoes at the fire tower. I was stationed at a remote fire tower in Montana, where silence usually felt like comfort. That night, though, footsteps echoed on the wooden steps outside long past midnight. When I opened the hatch, nothing but the empty staircase stretched downward, the smell of damp pine clinging to the air. I sat back down, trying to breathe evenly, until the old metal chair opposite mine shifted an inch across the floor, its scraping sound deliberate, as if someone invisible had just taken a seat. I watched the chair. The tower's little world, 12 by 12 feet of plywood and glass, held its breath with me. My lantern threw a steady circle across the Osborne fire finder in the center, the protractor ring gleaming, the alidade like a compass needle that had finally found something to point at. My coffee had gone cold. Moths ticked the window panes. Somewhere outside, a branch let go of the last of the storm's rain and tapped it down the catwalk rail. The chair didn't move again. Neither did I for a long stretch of minutes. I told myself the same lie every lookout learns. Wind? Would settling. A trick of muscles and fatigue. But I'd braced the chair legs with a wedge of folded map to stop that little wobble it had. It didn't scrape on its own. At 12:41 the radio coughed. Not the chirp and hiss I was used to from dispatch, but a thin, distant ripple, as if someone were speaking through river water. Copy Larch Peak. Do you copy? Our tower hadn't been called Larch Peak in decades. The sign on the trailhead read Granite Lookout. Still, I reached for the mic. Granite to dispatch, I said, voice steadier than my hand. Say again? Silence, then a faint whisper of carrier wave like breath on the line. I set the mic down and pressed the heel of my palm into my chest until my heart slowed. When I looked up, the chair opposite had pivoted just a hand's width toward the fire finder. I didn't stand. I told the chair, told the air, okay, and slid my own seat closer to the circular map. The alidate's sighting arms rested over the ring at 000 degree, pointing at the north window. I'd cleaned and oiled the instrument that afternoon, then left it dead center as always. Now the pointer had shifted. The right-hand sight kissed the 94 mark. I leaned to the window at 94 degrees. Darkness. The storm's tail had dragged over us at dusk. Scattered showers had left the world slick and quiet. Down beyond the ridge, the forest folded into dark shoulders and deeper hollows. No stars. No lights. No orange, no glow. I stood anyway, raised the binoculars and panned slowly. My own reflection floated in the glass, paper white, wide-eyed. Nothing, I said. What am I supposed to? The chair scraped again, closer this time, its front legs lifting, settling, as if someone had hooked their boots around the braces and towed it in with their shins. It stopped with its seat almost touching the firefinder's table. "Okay," I said again because it was a word that meant something and nothing at once. My voice sounded wrong in the small room, like it belonged to an answering machine. I put a fingertip to the alidade, meaning to push it back to 0 out of stubbornness, and it shuddered under my skin, a pressure almost like static, a gentle insistence, and slid to 109. At 109 degrees, I could see the far lip of Wren Gulch where the lodgepole thickened and broke, where lightning liked to lay its thumbs in July and leave bad ideas buried. I didn't see smoke, but the air that whisked across my face through the cracked pane had a stubbed-out smell beneath the wet pine, like a match pinched between fingers. "Hold over, sleeper." The words we use for fires that don't show themselves until a day or two after the storm that made them. I keyed the mic. "Granite to dispatch," I said. "Possible sleeper at 109, perhaps Wren Gulch, distance unknown." Static, then the night shift's calm, slow voice. "Copy, Granite. Sleeper? You got eyes on?" "Negative. Odor only. Lightning today." "Affirm." "Log it provisional. We'll send a recon crew at first light." The line went quiet again. I sat back down. The chair opposite didn't retreat. It sat where a second lookout would sit if I had one. If we still ran two-person towers the way the old photographs show, two figures on stools, backs crooked the same way, facing the circle of numbers like a prayer wheel. "What do you want me to write?" I asked. The logbook lay open under my hand, the paper soft with use, the green ink grid of time and weather marching down the page. I set my pencil. A drop from my sleeve blotted the corner of the paper. The pencil's point looked like a tiny spear aimed at a quiet country where nothing bad could ever happen. The chair creaked just once, then stilled. The radio didn't cough again. The tower, liberated from whatever conversation it had required of me, let its noises back in. The minuscule, constant whine of wind where the window didn't quite seal, the harsh little zips of insect wings, an occasional sigh from the stovepipe, which made as much sense as breath from a thing of metal. I wrote, 049, possible sleeper at 109 degrees Wren Gulch. Odor only. Recon at first light. Unverified phenomenon. Chair moved, alidade shifted. My hand hovered. I added, footsteps on stairs prior. Hatch opened to nothing. I closed the book. Left it to the left of the firefinder like a plate left out for a house cat that doesn't exist. The first step creaked then another. Not coming up fast, not trying to be quiet. A pace the body makes when it carries a load and knows it has all night to do it. "You won't catch me with that twice," I said to the hatch. I took the axe from behind the door and set it across my knees because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. The steps rose to the landing and stopped. No shadow through the glass. No silhouette. The latch on the hatch bent sideways without lifting, like fingers unsure of the angle. It rattled once, then stilled. "It stuck," I said absurdly, as if I were talking to a tired friend. "Twist left, then up. There you go." Nothing moved. The smell of damp pine swelled. Another drip broke off the rail. I stood and paced once around the firefinder, once around the edge of the room, just to remind myself what breathing felt like. As I circled, the chair followed me a half-inch at a time, angling to keep me in view. Like a deer's ear. When the steps started down again, I realized I'd been waiting for that sound. A kind of relief left me hollow, the way it does when a thunderhead finally spends itself and the world feels wrung out. I went to the hatch and cracked it just once to look. The staircase dropped away into black. Rain had slicked the treads. On the seventh step down, I could see a long split in the grain where the wood had swelled. That split hadn't been there yesterday. If I'd planted my heel there on a wet descent with a pack or in a hurry, it would have turned under me like a loose tooth. I closed the hatch very gently and slid the bolt. At 3:03 the tower cooled enough that breath smoked again and the lantern's globe fogged with it when I leaned close. The chair had not moved for an hour. The Alidade held at 109. The radio slept, full of a stranger's dreams. The rain trailed off. A shredded strip of moon made the wet trees shine like they were caught in a slow river. Something else moved then, not in the room but just beyond the glass, a smudge wandering the catwalk rail the way a moth shadow does. It passed the north window, east, south, west in a patient circuit. When it reached the west, it paused. The air ticked, cool, dry, like a door opening in a house somewhere far away. A fogged oval bloomed on the glass, as if some face that didn't need to breathe had done me the courtesy anyway. I went toward it. The oval thinned and stretched and thinned again. For a moment I could see a little more through that patch, as if the world lined up in sympathy. Down the ridge, beyond the black pines, a darker spot that was motion instead of shadow. The moon scraped another degree of arc clear of cloud, and there, barely, was the dullest possible orange, like a coal drawn under ash and then left to think things over. I whispered, "I see it." The oval on the glass shrank and vanished. The chair finally eased backward, just an inch, as if a tired body had decided it could keep standing after all. Dawn came piecemeal, the way it does. First a lifting of black into many colors of gray, then the slow pouring of green back into the trees. A fox limped the trail below, amber as a secret. When the radio clicked awake at 6:12, it was the usual voice. "Granite dispatch. Crew headed for Wren Gulch. Confirmed heat on the ridge. Good catch." "Copy," I said, and watched the thin column of smoke unwind in daylight like a scraped knee finally deciding to bleed. The crew's engine growled faintly. They'd stomp it and dig it and drown it by 10. It wouldn't get a name. It would be a line in a log and a smudge on a shovel blade and a photograph of boots around a black circle. I wrote it up. The pen moved easier now that morning existed. I added another line before I closed the book and blushed at myself while I wrote it. "Thank you." I set the pencil on the seam and rested my palm on the cover. The wood beneath felt warmer than it had any right to. I cleaned the lantern. I boiled new coffee. I checked the windows and rechecked the hatch's bolt. When I finally stepped onto the catwalk to stretch my legs and look the guy wires over, the boards were dark with last night's rain. Each tread held its own private map in the dew. On the 7th step down, on the split, I found a gray smear where something that wasn't quite mud had pressed and then lifted. Not a footprint, not a paw. A shape like a fallen leaf's ghost. It smelled faintly of old smoke. The chair opposite mine stayed where it had settled. At noon, I slid it back under the table, aligning it with the fire finder like the pictures show. I did it the way you dress a body, careful with the corners. I told myself I did it just to make the place neat. That night I heard no footsteps. The tower's silence was back, thick and comfortable, stitched with cricket sound and far water. I slept a little on the cot between patrols, radio on my chest, mic snaked into my fist. I dreamed, maybe, of a man in a damp wool jacket who loved the numbers around the circle as I did. Or a woman with hair braided tight against lightning and a voice that only radios remember. Or just of myself, split into the versions of me that had and hadn't opened a hatch when someone asked. Wait. Later, the recon boys stopped by on their way out to the far ridge. They leaned their elbows on my windowsills and asked if it got lonely at night. I told them sometimes. They asked if that old Alidade still stuck around 90 degrees. I told them I kept it greased. "Better watch those stairs," the youngest said, pointing his chin at the hatch as if it were a topic in town we were both pretending not to discuss. "Buddy of mine cracked an ankle out here last season. Step went under him like it was tired of being wood." "7th?" I asked. He blinked. "Yeah." After they left, I opened the logbook to the oldest pages, the ones before the station name changed, before the ink switched colors. The handwriting leaned like a man bracing himself against weather. At the bottom of a page dated decades ago, under lines of wind and cumulus and nothing special, there was an extra note that didn't belong to the shift summary. "Steps after midnight. Odor of wet needles." Chair moved again. Alidade insisted on 110 degrees, Wren Gulch, sleeper confirmed. If you're alone, you don't have to be. I didn't add anything clever to it. I didn't draw a line under the words or circle them. I just closed the book and set it where it always sits, a low, solid presence between two chairs. Now, when the air goes damp and the night gets its teeth into the ridge, I don't listen for the steps. I don't try the hatch to prove anything. I pour a second cup because it's a habit that feels less like pretense than prayer. When the chair moves, and sometimes it still does, I don't mind the scrape. It isn't a threat. It's the tower remembering what the forest is like when it forgets to sleep, and asking if I'm ready to look. Story 4. The Unmarked Trail. I know every trail in Redwood National Park. Last night I found one that isn't on any map. Fresh footprints in single file, hospital tags winking from the trees, and when it called roll, it said my name wrong. I went back the next night with every map I had ever trusted spread across the passenger seat like a deck of bad omens. The new path still split from the service road at the same angle, fresh dirt stippled with the same narrow soles, all of them aligned like a class that had learned to walk without touching shoulders. My beam kept catching on pale snags that looked less like hikers' shirts and more like hospital gown ties, thin and lint, the kind you don't buy at the visitor center. Somewhere ahead, water should have been talking. There's a seasonal runnel that threads this section, but the sound was swallowed as if the forest had pressed two fingers to its own lips. I marked trees with biodegradable ribbon, turned on my body cam and took the first bend. The woods went quiet enough to hear the battery icon blink. The voices didn't start until I'd gone far enough that the road was just memory, and when they came, they didn't spill out of the dark so much as seep from it, low, damp syllables leaking between trunks. I heard count off, then keep pace, then a choked roll call where every name sounded like mine mispronounced. The footprints never overlapped, never hesitated. Whoever used this trail had learned to move single file the way a river learns its bed. My radio whispered back fragments of my own check-ins from weeks ago, warped thinner, as if played on a machine running a little fast. I reached a stump where a sign had once been bolted and torn free, the wood around the holes black-stained, and beyond it, the track narrowed to a slit between two redwoods bent toward each other like a gate. The last print was pressed on the exposed root like a heel wedged into bone, and then nothing but undisturbed duff. Behind me, soft as a hand over a mouth, someone said, "Eyes front." I didn't turn when the order came. Not because I'm disciplined, but because something in the voice hooked the back of my skull and angled it forward like a finger under a chin. The gate of the leaning redwoods pinched the air colder. My breath felt stitched, each inhale tugging at a seam I couldn't see. My ribbons were gone. I knew where I'd tied them, left shoulder height, half hitches, but the bark showed no crush marks, no curl of pressed lichen. Past the gate, the ground changed from duff to a tamped, chalky strip the width of a gurney. The scraps on the branches thickened, not cotton but that papery weave they make disposable sheets from, peppered with pinholes as if something had been safety pinned all the way along and ripped loose in a hurry. 10 yards in, my boot clipped something metallic. A tag the size of a quarter winked in the beam, aluminum, stamped with a number and 2 letters, 14B. It wasn't gear I recognized. It was the kind of tag you see on bed frames and wheelchairs in surplus catalogs. I called it in, habit more than hope, and dispatch answered, except it was my voice, my exact phrasing from a loop I remembered making last spring, right down to the stress on the word copy. Then the loop bled and a second voice, mine again, younger and short of breath, added, "Keep pace." I backed a step, and behind me my print had been replaced by the same narrow sole I'd been following all night, heels set firm as if someone had stepped into my subtraction. Ahead, the line of those soles continued, perfect and unbroken, and the trees on either side leaned in a degree more courteous as ushers. The smell changed next, cedar and cold iron giving way to that thin, astringent sting that lives in clinics and on hands washed too often. At intervals along the path, saplings had been shaved smooth and fitted with split-neck notches at the top, the kind that cradle a pole. I ran my glove over one and felt the burr where something had been clipped on and lifted away, Heavy enough to score the grain, regular enough to repeat every few yards. Above, the canopy blacked out the sky entirely. When I checked my compass it was steady, but my sense of direction smeared, as if the needle were true and the forest were what had rotated around us. The radio popped with the bright ceramic ding of a hospital intercom and then steadied into white breath. When the cadence started, 1, 2, 3, it wasn't from one mouth but many stitched together, the way wind makes a choir out of slats. I stepped off the chalky strip to test a hunch and hit a softness that wasn't air, a resistance like wading into a sleeping animal, yielding then disapproving. My next step slid back onto the path without my permission. That was when my light caught a loop of paper bracelet in the duff. The glue seam parted, the barcode smudged into a gray flag. The printed name was mostly gone, but the surviving letters made my own in the wrong order, like a ransom note trying to remember me. I pocketed it, and a voice, not from the radio, not from any one direction, said, conversational as checking a chart, "No personal items beyond this point." A little farther on, the chalk brightened as if the path had been dusted between rounds. The woods rearranged themselves into suggestions of a ward, ferns combed flat like sheets, saplings spaced at bed-length intervals, trunks marked with 2 nail holes exactly shoulder-width apart. Above my head, a thin run of fishing line stitched tree to tree in a soft rectangle, the kind of geometry a curtain track might remember after the curtains are gone. I swept the beam and caught more aluminum tags, 14C, 14D, 14E, glinting at eye level, their edges chewed by weather. They weren't random. They arced left the way rooms bend around a nurse's station. My radio gave a woodpecker's knock that was one beep short of a heart monitor and then steadied into nothing. When I checked my watch, the second hand moved with the same military calm the footprints had, never overlapping, never doubling back. I laid a twig across the path at my toes to see if the forest would correct me and blinked. It had rotated itself parallel, tidy as a bed rail. "Hello?" I tried, keeping my voice low to avoid sounding like a patient waking. "Present," a dozen mouths said back in a single breath, the syllable falling to the floor and rolling under every tree. A clipboard hung from a rusted spike in the nearest trunk. The paper looked blank until my breath slid over it and the condensation found faint lines. "Admit, Park Ranger," my name, misprinted once, corrected in a hand I recognized as my own initials. "Disposition, discharge to Trail 14. I peeled the page up and the paper split with a sound like skin from tape. Somewhere ahead, wheels, small ones, hard ones, squeaked like they wanted oil. Without deciding to, I stepped aside to make room, and the air bulged past me in a gurney shape, the front right corner catching my sleeve and pinning it to my ribs. Behind me, something efficient and unseen rolled through my last boot print without leaving so much as a scuff. I tried to step backward through my own choices, to unspool the night like fishing line, but the path refused anything that looked like retreat. Every turn I remembered became a straightaway. The chalk took on a gloss, not wet but sealed, and the beam from my flashlight skated over it like over waxed floor. A placard I swear hadn't been there a second before was screwed into a trunk at chest height. Quiet hours 2200 to 0600, visitors check-in, Trail 14 only. The screws bit through lichen and sap as if wood could heal around policy. Below the sign, a round button the color of old ivory glowed with a down arrow. When I touched it, something deep in the earth accepted the call and began lifting a hush up toward us. Footsteps, not mine, not any one person's, approached in a teacher's cadence, the exact distance between them as if measured. I stepped to the side, broke the rule, and that tolerant softness shouldered me back onto the strip with the gentle pressure of hands that didn't need me to understand to make me comply. The line of prints caught up to me then, not from ahead but from both directions at once, left and right margins closing like a zipper. Each narrow sole impression accepted my boot as if I were stepping into it pre-fitted, my heel finding resistance where a heel had already been allowed. 14, the voices murmured, more satisfied now, present. The radio coughed up the tinny ding of an elevator reaching a floor, and from the trees came a chime I recognized from the visitor center gift shop, except slowed until it felt like a pulse, a pleasant sound weaponized by duration. I took the clipboard again, meaning to tear the page out and keep it as proof, but a new line had bloomed in the condensation. Room 14B. Allergies, none. Notes, non-compliant. My initials appeared below in the penmanship I use when I'm tired. The air behind me exhaled and I felt the draft of doors parting, invisible and automatic, a rectangle of colder dark opening where no opening had been. "Eyes front," said the voice, not stern now, just practiced, the way you speak to someone who's done this before and doesn't remember. I kept my eyes front and stepped through. The dark on the other side wasn't absence but structure. A ward extruded from woods, the path widening into a bare, chalked rectangle with 4 aluminum corners glinting like casters. At the far end, a headboard shape had been pressed into the bark of a redwood, ghost letters where a placard had been, 14B. The bed was made with nothing, the sheet of tension in the air. The radio whispered, "Discharge to Trail 14, with the practiced mercy of bureaucracy," and the footprints gathered at the foot like family at visiting hours. Without thinking, I lifted the clipboard and read aloud the way I do at closures. "By authority of the National Park Service, this area is restricted. Trail closed." The words hung there, official and ridiculous. And yet something in the room that wasn't a room, paused. The caster's imagined squeak fell silent. The air's grip loosened a notch, as if policy had lodged in a hinge it respected. I backed out on that thread of language, eyes still front, counting myself away one step at a time like a person leaving a ward before their legs remember they're allowed. The doors I couldn't see closed with a soft, satisfied seal that made my teeth ache. When I reached the leaning trees, the gate I'd come through was just 2 redwoods again, their crowns refusing to touch. My ribbons were back where I'd tied them, a little higher than I remember. The bracelet fragment in my pocket had healed its seam. I finished the rounds and said nothing. Weeks on, when I walk that direction after dark, the muffled voices are still there, calling a roll so soft even the owls ignore it. They count to 13, never more. On 13 my throat tightens, my tongue wants to make the shape of present, and my radio warms under my hand, waiting for the ding. I carry the authority to close a trail, and I do, and still the forest keeps its bed made. Story 5. The last radio call, we called the graveyard shift the watch, like sailors because the mountains moved in tides. Fog poured over the ridgelines like a slow ocean, and the valleys filled and drained with sound, coyote threads, creek static, the brittle whisper of dead leaves. Between midnight and dawn, the Smokies felt emptied of people and crowded with everything else. That's when I sat alone at the ranger desk with a pot of coffee and a bank of radios humming at my elbow. I liked the order of it. Each frequency had a purpose. Law, maintenance, fire, search and rescue, reserved and quiet the way a locked cabinet is quiet. I swept them every 10 minutes, eyes skating over LEDs, right hand flipping the squelch back and forth to tempt out a voice from the fuzz. It was a ritual, a way to keep watch for the smallest ripple. A little after 2, that hour with no face, when even the owls sound tired, a voice came through. "Dispatch, Ranger 2, it said, calm and measured the cadence we practiced. I've got a lost hiker. Name is Emily Arden. Female, 27. I blinked once, pen already in hand. Comment trained. Menars. Copy, I said into the handheld automatic. Location. A faint cough on the other end like someone trying not to be heard. Then the steady hiss of carrier. My fingers hovered over the keypad, waiting for coordinates. Nothing else came. The transmission hung open for a beat too long, then cut so clean it made the silence afterward feel bright. I sat listening to the empty frequency until I realized I'd been holding my breath. I logged the call, time, channel, the facts, in the spiral notebook I kept as insurance against software crashes and bad luck. Then I started the checklist. I hailed the other stations on SAR one by one. Cosby. Elkmont. Sugarlands. Any units in the field? Any rangers awake, key to 3? The answers came back slow, voices thick with sleep. Negative. 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 No one admitted making the call. I pulled up the digital log, our repeater logs everything that hits it, and scrolled back. 2 a.m. to 2:10. Blanks. The sort of clean nothing that makes your skin prickle because nothing is never that clean out here. There's always at least the weather, the ground speaking into static. The name sat there on my paper, neat in my handwriting. Emily Arden. The problem was that I already knew it. 7 years earlier, the trailheads had bloomed with photocopied flyers showing a dark-haired woman in a rain shell the color of a faded stop sign. Hiker missing. Last seen on Porter's Creek Trail. She'd set out alone on a damp October afternoon and not come back. I wasn't a ranger then, only a volunteer in a borrowed vest, but I'd stood shoulder to shoulder in the headlamp galaxies of 100 other volunteers, sweating under spruce and laurel, listening to the scratch and whine of old radios. We heard rumor after rumor, sightings that dissolved on contact, footprints that became boot prints that became nothing at all. We never found her. Winter came down and we folded the maps. The night of the call, I wrote the name again, smaller, as if I could trap it under ink. Then I poured out the coffee, set a fresh pot, and worked out who to tell. By dawn I had 3 possibilities and none of them were any good. Prank, mistake, or a ghost. We don't say ghost on duty. We say anomalous, unverified, no recording in the log. By the time the day shift slid in with their trail dust and breakfast burritos, the fog had burned into gold bands across the hills. I passed off the report like a hot thing. The chief listened, glanced at the repeater log, and lifted an eyebrow I understood too well. "We'll keep an ear on it," she said. Which meant, "You did your job, we aren't calling anyone out of bed for smoke." That should have been the end. It wasn't. Once a name like that is back in your mouth, it tastes of metal no matter what you drink. For a week I was fine. I did the rounds. I checked the backcountry permits and the bear complaints and the rotting footbridge on the middle prong. Then on the second week, the voice returned at 2 in the morning, thin and far, as if the antenna were buried under leaves. Dispatch Ranger 2, lost hiker. Emily, the cough again, closer this time, an involuntary bark. The hair along my arms lifted. I held the mic to my mouth, but something in the old animal part of me kept me from pressing transmit, as if sound could be a lure. Again afterward, blank logs. Again, no one on 3 who'd fess up. I switched to maintenance, woke Reggie, our electrician, and asked if the repeater could be picking up cross-traffic from a ham club or the county sheriff. He yawned into the phone and told me physics didn't bend that way, not in this weather. What I didn't tell Reggie, what I didn't tell anyone, was that the cough sounded familiar. Not in the way of a particular person, but from a particular place. In the Smokies, the air itself sometimes rakes through you. Mold, pollen, cold fog. There's a way your lungs complain when you've been too long in the wet. The third night I brought the old handheld they let us check out for training, the one with the unreliable battery and the cracked antenna. It wasn't going to talk to the repeater across 3 counties, but it might hear something mine didn't. I set it on the desk next to the good radio and waited with both volumes low, the room a shallow bowl catching 2 different kinds of silence. At 2:07 the cheap handheld crackled before the bank unit did. A voice broke like a river against stone. Dispatch Ranger 2. Lost hiker. Emily Arda. Female 27. The cough was right in my ear. It felt so close I looked up, expecting to see someone in the doorway. Ranger 2, what's your location? I asked both radios at once. The handheld hissed like rain. On the bank set, pure nothing. Something, everything, I couldn't name pushed me out of the chair. I grabbed my pack in the handheld, left a note on the desk with a timestamp, and walked out into the wet dark. The mountain smells different after midnight. Trails you've done 100 times turn into corridors of breath, and every rock you know by muscle becomes unfamiliar under your boots. I drove 2 switchbacks up the black spine of the park road and cut the engine where a gated track went up toward an old stone lookout. Camera was a favorite with day hikers because the tower looked like it grew out of the cliff, a crown of native stone. At night it loomed. My headlamp picked out rhododendron leaves and the mica wink of the trail. Fog slid past the beam like slow smoke. I climbed to the tower on a staircase of slick roots and old knots in what I couldn't see. The handheld rode my shoulder strap, squelch fiddled until the noise felt like a pulse. I stopped twice to cough and spit, surprised at the damp weight in my chest, a hangover from the week's rain. Halfway up, the handheld spoke. "Copy," the voice said, so faint the word almost wasn't. "I've got a lost hiker. Name is Emily," as if the caller were reading, checking notes, breath ragged. The same cough, swallowed then forced. I stood still enough to feel my heartbeat against the radio's plastic shell. "Ranger 2, I read you," I said, breath turning white in my lamp's halo. "Say again your location." "Tower," came back, or my mind gave me that. "Stone." Camera was above me and to the left, just a ripple of darker dark against the sky. It wasn't the only stone tower in the park. But I'd learned to listen to the narrowest gut feeling. I'd learned what happened when I didn't. The last stretch was a ladder built by men whose names weren't in our logs, a rib cage of weathered timber that flexed under my weight. I came up into the doorway and felt the old tower take my presence into itself, the way certain rooms do. The hush, the prickle, the small sense of a thing greater than you. The wooden floorboards had softened with decades of water. The stone corners sweated. My headlamp caught the curve of a bench and the bleached wick of a spider web. On the floor near the north window, under a scatter of leaves and mouse droppings, something green-blue peered out. I knelt and brushed aside the debris. A flat whistle on a lanyard, cheap aluminum, dented. The stamped letters were faint but legible, E. Arden. Not proof, anyone can stamp a whistle, but it took my breath all the same. Beneath it lay a torn strip of red fabric with white seam tape. Rain shell. The kind a person buys when they've never needed one before and doesn't know it will fail them when the clouds get serious. "Dispatch, Ranger 2, I said, not trusting the bank set to carry me, pressing the handheld hard against my mouth. "I've got a possible recovery at Camera Tower." Send what?" "Send the sun, send a dozen men with rope, send the year back 7 turns." I swallowed. "Send a team. Mark my last." The handheld wheezed static. In the south wall, hidden by shadow, something creaked as if the tower breathed. I stood and my boot went through the floor. It happened the way the worst things do. No drum roll, no omen. Just rot surrendering its last bit of structure. My leg plunged to the hip, wood teeth bit into my thigh, and my weight dragged a wider hole open with a sound like tearing cloth. The lamp flung my own shadow around the room. When I hauled myself backward, the edges of the hole crumbled and I slid, catching at a beam with my forearms. I nearly dropped the radio. Pain flared so bright it changed the color of the world. I lay on the floor and breathed until the little lights at the edge of my vision dimmed. Something warm ran down my leg into my sock. When I touched it, my fingers came up slick. The cough that came then wasn't dainty or mysterious. It was dragged up out of a chest that had had enough. "Dispatch," I said, and hated how my voice shook. "Ranger 2. I'm at Camera Tower, injury, floor failure." I squeezed my eyes closed and pictured the map, the maze of repeaters, the known dead zones. Camera didn't speak well to Sugarlands. The good bank radio down at the station had heard strange things I couldn't explain. The repeater had heard nothing at all. Maybe I could skip the sky and thread a needle through fog. "I've got a lost hiker," I heard myself say. It wasn't what I planned. The words came anyway, neat like the way your hand writes a signature without you. "Name is Emily Arden. Female, 27. I wouldn't have said that if it wasn't true. I wouldn't have used the official phrasing unless I meant a team and a report and a line closed at last. I reached across the ruined floorboards and pulled the whistle and the strip of fabric close and set them in the circle of my lamp. Proof small enough to pocket. Proof that, in the morning, would mean something besides the ache in my thigh. The cough followed because that was the body's order of operations. Speak then spill. I turned the volume up to hear whether the handheld carried me. It replied the way a stream replies to a thrown rock, ripples, then a return to its old face. The bank radio back at the station, the one with the fancy logging and the sturdy antenna, would not hear me from this stone pocket, not through fog. But I knew, because I had sat in that chair with my coffee, because I had written a name in ink, that the old handheld could infect the distance weirdly. A slant path in the wet night. A radio that didn't record. It struck me then with a strange, cool calm. I had already heard this call. I had already logged it. I had already bent over the desk and written down a name I recognized from a flyer 7 years old. No one had made the call because no one could, except me now, with my leg bleeding into my boot, with the whistle warm from my palm. I thought of my younger self, the volunteer with the borrowed vest, stumbling behind the line of more competent lights, feeling the mountain as a giant mouth that wouldn't open. I thought of all the times since I'd given the right words to people who needed them, the way language can be a rope if you throw it right. Dispatch, I said again, making my voice level because that's what we owe each other here, even in the dark. Ranger 2. Lost hiker by name, Emily Arden. I gave the descriptors I remembered from the report: height, hair, red shell, half from the old flyer, half from what lay in my light. I added, evidence in hand. I tried to give coordinates and the numbers tangled. My head swam. I tasted iron like a coin on my tongue. The tower creaked. Fog pressed a cold hand against the windows. Below me, wind moved through the trees in great slow lungs. I keyed the mic one last time and said nothing, letting the carrier sing so some part of the world would feel me. On the edge of hearing, the handheld answered itself. A thin voice, mine stretched across water. Dispatch, Ranger 2. Lost hiker. Emily Arden. And the cough, that faint human tell that says a body still holds a person even when the mountains ask otherwise. My light dimmed. I turned it low, then off. The room became a shape more than a place. I lay with my cheek against old wood, the whistle under my fingers, the red scrap caught under my palm so it wouldn't go anywhere in the night. The hurt rolled through me like weather. In the valley below, another version of me poured fresh coffee and bent over a notebook, already starting the line with the time, ready to dispatch help. When the carrier tone finally died, the tower breathed on. The radio warmed under my hand, and the whole black sweep of forest pressed close as if to listen, like it had for every last call anyone ever made up here and would again.